Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual programs. My name is Nick Brown. I'm the COO for Communication and Outreach at the library. So grateful that you have chosen to join us tonight. Electoral College Day in the United States. It's a pretty big day, and the vaccine started to be available. So we know there's a lot to distract you in life today, and we're glad that you chose to spend it with our great community here at the library this evening. This event is being presented in collaboration with the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission, which is our great partner organization here in the county. They are our civil rights, education, and enforcement agency. We extend special thanks to their executive director, Renee Battlebrooks, and outreach coordinator, Kyla Hannington, who have been wonderful partners of the libraries throughout the year and from before as well. Tonight is a very special event featuring author Zack Smedley, and you'll get a full introduction about Zack in just a moment. But before I jump off the screen, just want to remind everyone two things. One is that you should borrow Zack's book from the library or purchase a copy through Loyalty Bookstores, which is a Maryland and DC-based Black, woman, and queer-owned bookstore. And also would like to introduce to you two very special colleagues, both who have a connection to my team at the Communication and Outreach Division at the library. Kelsey Hughes, who is the former Teen Services Specialist for the library and who I happen to work with in a quick way back when she was at the Young Reader Center at the Library of Congress many years back. And also introduce you to our colleague Isaiah West, who's the library's current Teen Services Specialist. And also, you might recognize Kelsey from out and about in the library, but she is especially known now as the Librarian 3, overseeing the operations of the South Bowie branch, which is one of our most spectacular branches in the system. So enjoy the program. We'll turn over to Kelsey and Isaiah, and thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
And hi, Zack. Welcome. I guess we'll just jump in by, I'll read your bio here and introduce you. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So Zack Smedley was born in 1995 in an endearing Southern Maryland county almost no one has heard of. His critically acclaimed debut novel, Deposing Nathan, was a Kirkus Best Books of 2019 selection, an ALA Rainbow List selection, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and winner of the 2019 YA Buy Book Award. Alongside writing, he has a degree in chemical engineering from UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and currently works within the field. He spends his free time building furniture, baking, programming, screenwriting, and tinkering with electronic systems. And you can find him online at zacksmedleyauthor.com. So Zack, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about your book, Deposing Nathan? Can you tell us what it's about?
Oh, sure. Oh, wow. I haven't done this in a long time because it's been a while since I've been to a conference. It's about two best friends who have to testify against each other in court and tell the story of how they went from meeting and being best friends and being a little more than best friends to ultimately having a deadly falling out. And now one is in jail for stabbing the other. And so the book is the story that Nathan, one of the boys, tells when he's being deposed in a not technically a courtroom, but a conference room in a courthouse.
Wow.
Yeah, it's literally been a year since I've had to do that pitch. I'm amazed I still had it in my head.
Yeah, and I asked you to do it because there's so much stuff that happens in the book. I don't know that I could summarize it, so I figured you would be able to do a better job of it.
Yeah, I think we took 6 different drafts when we were writing the flap summary because we were like, okay, what do we condense this down to? Yeah.
Well, before we dive into that, because that is a very heavy topic, let's maybe start with something a little bit lighter.
Yeah, for sure.
We are a Maryland library. What is this endearing county that you are from?
St. Mary's County.
Mary's. That's awesome. So St. Mary's, obviously your book is not set in a specific area, but did your home county make its way into your book at all?
Not particularly. My home is have you heard of St. Mary's County? And it's okay if you haven't.
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. So you'd be surprised how many people I've met at my workplace that haven't, even though it's like an hour and a half south of here. Yeah. No, I wanted to do West Virginia as the setting for my book because I was the most read up on their legal system, and it was important to me that all the legal stuff be portrayed accurately. And I wasn't as read up on Maryland's and didn't care to learn it. So yeah, I think a lot of people assume I have some connection to West Virginia, and I just like don't. In fact, when Audible asked me to send them like production notes when they were doing the audiobook, they said, by the way, do you want us to include the accents? And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, do you want the characters to have a West Virginia accent? And I said, what West Virginia accent? And I had just assumed that people in West Virginia sounded like me because it's what, like an hour or two from here? And so I YouTubed West Virginia accent and realized they sound very, very, very different than I thought. So yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about, and I would never really thought about a West Virginia accent either, to be honest.
Oh, okay. That makes me feel better. It's very Southern sounding.
Okay.
Yeah, didn't know that.
What did you end up doing with the audiobook? I have to say.
Oh, I said no accents, or I shouldn't say no accents, but you know, I don't know what you would characterize my accent as, but I basically told them, do that.
Wait, how did you become familiar with the West Virginia legal code and not Maryland's legal code?
Many, many, many hours of reading and talking to a lawyer as well, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Took a while.
So you're still in Maryland, and in fact, not too long ago, you graduated from UMBC and studied engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I noticed is that, well, first of all, you mentioned to us today that you're currently working in an engineering field, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing now outside of writing, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, there's not a ton I can say about it, but it's in particular one of the our areas of study recently has obviously been COVID-related stuff, basically evaluating how COVID particles are transmitted and testing how, for example, a piece of two-layer cloth, how good that is at actually stopping it. I get to dabble a little bit with the machines that can actually spit out a number of like, okay, there's 10,000 particles outside this mask, and inside the mask there's like 3, and it's like, okay, that's probably a pretty good mask. So that's been our area as of recently. It's been a mixed bag. I was mentioning earlier, it's obviously kind of cool to have that information, but it's also information overload, especially in 2020.
Right.
So, and balancing it with writing is an interesting line to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and also, you wouldn't necessarily put engineering and YA authorship in the same bag that you would be grabbing from. So, how did you end up writing your first book?
Well, I was 12 at the time, I believe. And oh God, I can't believe I'm telling this story. So keep in mind I was 12. I was watching Disney Channel and I saw this really old Disney Channel original movie called Read It and Weep. I don't know if you've heard of it or seen it. Probably not. And of course, 12-year-old me was... the premise of the movie is basically a girl writes an essay for English and then accidentally gets it published as a best-selling book, as one does. And I ran to my room and just started like typing, I even forget what, I think it was a description of like a portal or something. And then throughout high school, I wrote 17 books, all of which were very, very, very bad. I would describe them as like Percy Jackson knockoffs with a little bit of Narnia knockoff thrown in there. So it's fantasy. And they were, the best thing I can say about them is they were complete books. Each of them was about 400 pages. So I was typing a lot and writing a lot. Yeah. And then when I was moving away from home, going from like high school to college, I was one of those people that got like really, really emotional about it. Like wrote a journal every day about it and took a million pictures and was a mess. And so to cope with that, I wrote my first YA contemporary book. And that was what I would call, I don't know what I would call it. It had shades of like Perks being Wallflower in there, but it was basically a whole lot of nothing. It was just people hanging out and moving on from high school and stuff. And I worked on polishing that throughout most of college. It didn't quite go anywhere. There were a lot of half steps where it would like get an R&R request from agent, or they would ask for more material and then not follow up on it. And so finally, my senior year of college, I decided to just try a totally new idea, aka Best Friends in Court. And at the time, I became hooked on the writings of Aaron Sorkin, who some people know by name. He's not an author, but he's a screenwriter. He did Social Network, Steve Jobs, Molly's Game, and The West Wing. And most recently, Trial of the Chicago 7. And if you're familiar with him, he has like his dialogue is like really, really fast paced and back and forth and stuff. And so I kind of figured I would try doing that, but like for YA and a court drama, and also throw in some bi stuff. And that's how my book happened.
That's a lot of different, like you mentioned, a lot of different and really interesting references, and it's cool to hear how they all wove together and kind of led to Deposing Nathan.
Yeah, that was a really long answer. I apologize.
No, I thought it was really interesting to hear like Percy Jackson and Perks, and also Aaron Sorkin thinking about maybe pulling all those pieces together into Deposing Nathan. Were there any other like authors that had a big influence on you, or other media that influenced you a lot?
Yes, a big one was Laurie Halse Anderson. That was the first, so her book Twisted was the first YA contemporary book I ever read. I was in 9th grade and we were assigned it, and I was dreading it because I hadn't liked any books that I'd been assigned up till that point. And almost instantly, when I started reading that one, I was like, wow, there's like cursing in this, and like mentions of like sexual stuff, everything that like my 14-year-old brain was latched onto. And I read it in one sitting, and I was blown away at how, for lack of better phrasing, a book could be literary and assigned to an English classroom, but also like kind of cool and like fun. And so that stuck with me. I still have my copy of Twisted on my bookshelf. Anytime I'm like stuck or just want some stylistic inspiration, I'll go back and read it. And I actually met Laurie at an event, I believe it was NCTE last November. And I basically word vomited a less coherent version of what I'm saying here. And she was just the coolest person on earth about it.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
So thinking about, just to jump back a little bit to talk about, you mentioned how interesting it is to be kind of scientist during the day and then writer literally by night.
Yeah.
How do you kind of balance those two worlds? What is it like to have both of those worlds kind of coinciding?
It's weird right now because I'm, as you can probably tell, like young-ish. I look like 12. I'm actually in my early 20s, but still young-ish. And so I'm still like just trying to figure out how to navigate professional life. Like I've got my engineering job by day and I love that. And I've got my writing stuff by night. And obviously I love that as well. But in both fields, I've got people talking to me about like building my career and making this, my legacy and stuff. And I'm kind of stuck because I have to tell both sets of people like, hey, I can't do a lot right now because you're only getting 50% of me. And originally I told my agent I would not be writing a new book for probably about 5 or 10 years. And she quickly explained to me that that's not how things work in publishing. And that most authors, who had the full-time ability to really build their career would have probably cranked out, 2 or 3 books by now. Whereas I'm just finishing up my second one 2.5 years after my first one. Technically 4 years after my first one, if we're counting since I drafted it. So yeah, I guess the answer to your question would be it's very time consuming. It's weird how I present myself. It kind of feels like there's a switch flipping. And everyone in my chemi job can't believe I'm an author, and everyone in my author job can't believe I'm a chemical engineer. So yeah, I'm very interested to see where I'll be 5 years from now and which side of the balance I'll be on, or if I'll still be right down the middle. But yeah, I'm having a good time.
I feel like you can kind of see that in Deposing Nathan. I was going back through it today, and you have Cam, who's really fascinated by biology and like spouts off all these technical terms. And then you have Nathan, who is like wants to be a painter and wants to be an artist and like wants to express that side of him. So I feel like you can kind of see some of that playing out on the page.
Yeah, it's both of those fields are not ever things I have like interacted with, but they are things that are, I guess, sort of semi-related. So like I've never painted, I'm awful at it. I'm a stick figures person. And so I don't know. I guess I'm never comfortable just totally like copy pasting myself onto characters. And yeah, with Cam, I actually was not already familiar with a lot of the stuff that he talks about. I actually audited a couple of biomedical engineering courses my senior year at UMBC while I was writing this, so I would be able to write his dialogue authentically, because I know in both YA and in adult books even, you have people who are like super geniuses, but then when you hear the stuff come out of their mouth, it's clearly like what you think a genius sounds like. And I wanted to do my homework on this from both like the legal stuff and the biology stuff. The painting I didn't really have to do any homework on, but I'm still a terrible painter.
Yeah. So am I. I was once described by my husband as a really good second grade level. So that's my
like
solid stance. I wear it with honor.
That's like the ultimate backhanded compliment for something like that.
Yeah. So let's go back to Deposing Nathan.
Absolutely.
So that title, it's a strong title. Why did you choose that, or is that one that your publisher chose?
Oh, I chose it, and then I fought for it pretty tenaciously. Yeah, I chose it just because I thought it's my main thing, being honest, was Googleability. Maybe that's not quite the right way to say it, but I didn't want it to be one of those, a blank of blank and blank, or any of the title trends these days, which is probably not a great like business model, but I wanted it to be a little unique, and also I wanted it to fit the story. Deposing has a couple of meanings. One is obviously what's going on with the deposition. Another is to unseat or unsettle, which is what happens with Nathan. And then a third is to, this is a weird definition, but I believe it was to like impart with a new worldview or a new universe or something like that. And that's also obviously what happens. So I liked it. I thought it was, sort of just punchy, easy to say. And then when it got to my publisher, they said, we agree, but we need a new title for it because it just doesn't sound like a YA book. It sounds like a legal handbook that you would find in some lawyer's office. And we went back and forth. We made lists of probably 10 to 15 different possible titles, and just I am that controlling jerk that is like very particular about aspects of the product and all of that. But also I genuinely thought Deposing Nathan was the best title for it. So they ultimately said yes on it, I think reluctantly, but I really, really appreciate that I have the best publisher ever that is willing to honor that stuff. And they said they liked it the best, but just in terms of marketability, all the time I will have people write to me about it and say like, I didn't think this was going to be like a YA-ish novel with emotional stuff in it. And I don't know, maybe I shot myself in the foot with the title choice, but I like it. And yeah, I pushed for it pretty hard.
Yeah, I know what you mean about the like YA title trends. Like I feel like right now the big thing is like a one-word action verb. So like maybe it would just be like depose.
Depose, yeah. Or Nathan, yeah. Yeah.
So good for you for sticking, like really pushing for that. If that was your vision.
Well, and it's funny, I didn't think I was the jerk that didn't trust the advice I was given. I didn't think my publisher was correct that that would be really a problem in terms of people like recognizing it. And I figured most people would just, you know, oh yeah, deposing. But there was a couple of weeks after my book came out, I did the thing where I wanted to start going around to bookstores to like see if it was there. And so I would call a couple of my local bookstores to be like, hey, are you carrying this thing? And almost nobody like got the word the first time. I was like, deposing Nathan. They're like, you say disposing? I'm like, no, deposing. Like, deposing? I said, yeah. And I even had one woman insist that that was not a real word. She was like, honey, that's not a real word. And I hadn't told her that I was the author. And so I kind of had to at that point. But yeah, when I got off the phone that night, I was like, oh, okay, my publisher was completely right about this. And, you know, again, maybe I shot myself in the foot. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I never thought about the multiple meanings. I think that's really cool. And you're totally right about it being very unique. So I like it.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
So to dive a little bit more into the plot, something that both Isaiah and I, when we were discussing it, found really interesting and important is that it grapples both with Nathan and actually both characters kind of discovering their bisexuality, something which is often underrepresented in literature and media, although I think it's starting to get there.
Yeah.
And then also kind of grappling with religious identity, which I really don't see a lot of, especially in YA literature. And especially, you know, in the context of the Pope recently acknowledging domestic partnerships. We're just kind of curious, like where that story came from and why it felt important for you to kind of put those things together and talk about them.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people assume that it has anything to do with my own experience with religion, and just flat out no. I am in sort of Cam's boat when it comes to the religion versus sexuality thing. I have never spent a day having any issue with it, or struggling to, you know, make those two coexist in my brain. So in that sense, it wasn't like a personal journey of mine or anything, but sort of as you said, I just wasn't seeing it in YA. I was seeing religion maybe sort of mentioned, or like spirituality mentioned, but it was sort of in a passing way or just downright being made fun of. And I haven't gone through anything like what my main character goes through, but I have seen a lot of people who have. I've seen a lot of people who were raised religious, and then if they think they might be LGBT later, it's a real bind. Like, how do you make that coexist? And since I was always so in the, you know, mindset of, well, yeah, it can coexist, here's why. That's why I figured I would write a book about it. And then because I like doing things the difficult way, I figured I would do it from a first person perspective. So that required me to do many, many hours of research, combing through forums, where looking at discussions of people who have gone through something like this, watching a lot of documentaries, even sitting down with a few people. It was a long process because there is nothing about Nathan that I can relate to. I can relate to a ton of Cam stuff. I talk pretty fast. I can get very sarcastic at very bad times. And obviously I'm interested in, you know, science and stuff. So I guess to answer your question, I wasn't seeing it portrayed in YA when it comes to religion stuff. I'm not planning to write about it again, but I figured I tried to say everything I have to say on that subject and put it in that book. As for the bisexuality stuff, that one is a little more personal, because here's how my journey went. It was pretty short. growing up, I had never heard the word bisexual, didn't know that was a thing, just didn't. Was pretty aware starting around college that like I was open to dating whomever. Didn't think there was a word for that. If anybody asked, hey, are you open to dating whomever? I'd be like, yeah, wish there was a word for it. And then in about halfway through college, I found out there was a word for it. And I was like, oh, whoa, people should be like a lot more public about this. And right around the time I saw a very influential to me movie called The Normal Heart. Have you guys heard of that? Okay, it's starring Mark Ruffalo, who gives a phenomenal performance as Larry Kramer, who's a real life figure. He was one of the first AIDS activists. So Larry Kramer wrote this about his own journey, fighting the bureaucracy and trying to get funding for research back when AIDS was first, being discovered. And it's a phenomenal movie. It is right up there with Aaron Sorkin dialogue in terms of intelligence and I don't know, seeing that and then also realizing I was LGBT, I was so hooked on the idea of LGBT media that is like really, really intelligently written and really dives deep into an issue and isn't afraid to be loud, even if it can be a little controversial. And so, yeah, I just throw all that in a blender and I got this book a year later.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. You kind of touched a little bit on this, but I would definitely like to know if you're comfortable. Like, did you get any insights about yourself as you were writing Deposing Nathan?
Not really. Like I said, Nathan's journey is so separate from my own. I, if anything, just discovered how much I like writing the sort of rapid fire dialogue and stuff. Like when I was working on this book, it was so different than the, 17 books I'd written in high school. Those were just sort of like dabbling in ripping off authors I liked. Whereas this was like, I felt like, like there's a story in here that I'm telling and I'm really feeling it, even if it's not a journey I've been on. And ultimately, my goal was to write a book that whether you're LGBT or not, whether you care about any of these issues or not, it can just be, for lack of a better term, entertaining, like gripping. And you can want to know what's going to happen. And that was a really tall order, especially since I was like, I think 19 at the time. I don't know if I delivered on it. But I know that it sort of unlocked my passion for writing that sort of stuff at the time.
Yeah. So I think we can kind of just hear this from hearing you talk about some of the issues that you wanted to deal with in the book. And in your bio, you talk about wanting to write morally complex stories. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about why moral complexity is so important to you, like why you feel like you want to focus on that as being a central element of your stories. I feel like you can definitely see it throughout Deposing Nathan. And then relatedly, we don't want to spoil anything, but like, why not wrap up the ending in like a nice, neat way? Like you leave it very, very open.
Yeah. So, oh man, this is a really good question because I am really passionate about this. The moral complexity thing, here is the answer. I don't know if this was everyone's experience, but me growing up as a teenager, I was so heavily influenced by whatever media was in front of my face. And so, okay, again, I'm hoping this is not just me, but like when I would watch, for example, The Fault in Our Stars, and there's the moment where like, oh God, it's been forever. Like Gus is like throwing something at someone's car. And then when he gets yelled at, he's like, I'm in the middle of delivering an important soliloquy. I would then go and talk like that because I thought that's how people were supposed to talk. And of course, looking back, that's not true. And where this gets a little more serious is I love YA dearly, but oh boy, is there some problematic messages being thrown around. And it's not just in YA, but this is more where I care about it. Because if you're reading a, let's say, adult romance novel with some problematic tropes in it, I'm assuming that's not going to be as influential on teenagers as, say, a YA book with teenagers who, and again, I'm not picking on any particular, book or genre even, but couples who behave all problematic and then it just like works out and they're like, well, we like each other enough because I did that too. And I thought that was how it worked. And I hope I'm not on an island with that, but my thing is, I really would have just liked YA books that were entertaining and had teenage characters, but also just like showed how real life worked or should work, rather than being so escapist that it was just plain unrealistic. And so I think that kind of answers both your questions at once. It's like I like the moral complexity, and then the ending of the book, it's interesting. That is by far the thing that I get the most chatter about, like the thing that people email me about, the thing that's mentioned in reviews. And that took me a while to get used to because it was never, ever going to end any other way. Like, it never even crossed my mind. To me, they got off pretty easily considering like the premise. And if nothing else, I think it would have been really problematic to have it play out how I think a lot of people were expecting it to play out. And I really wish that weren't such an outlierish way of thinking when it comes to the industry. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The first time I read it through, I feel like I was in the like, oh, come on kind of camp. And then the second time through, I don't know, I'm having trouble saying this without spoiling anything, but the second time through, I found myself much happier, actually, that it ended the way it did, because I agree with you. I feel like Cam has such a clear-headedness through that. And I found myself being like, yes, yes, yes. Like, I'm just like rooting for him to like speak his truth, I guess.
Right. Well, and not to like be up on my soapbox here, but to me, good storytelling is like every character goes on their own journey and has a beginning, middle, and end. And as mentioned, I identify a lot more with Cam than Nate in that book. And so his journey, there could be a whole book just about that, where it's like you meet somebody and then you want things to work and you can tell they're like just about there, but they're like not. And it's like, come on, dude. And, I think that's what gave me the sort of insight to write what it must have been like on his end. And so, yeah, not spoiling the ending. We're doing a lot of tap dancing around it here, but that's such a victory for him. What happens and what he does, and his arc, I think, would have been incomplete without it. And if anything, to me, that was the way to inject some happiness into the ending, is because even if one person's life is sort of not looking great where we leave off, the other person's is. And so some good came out of it, although I maintain that I think good came out of both ends of it. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you all said about that ending being the best ending and the best outcome for both. But you just put them both through the ringer so much. Like you're kind of hoping. I don't know. I definitely was happy. I don't like nice, neat, tidy endings for sure, because happily ever after doesn't always happen. So it definitely made sense. However, speaking of not happily ever afters, the part that as soon as Kelsey and I started talking about this, the question that I actually said was the ant. Like, I want to know about the ant.
Yeah.
So why bring extended family into it? I think it's really interesting that you also chose to write about familial abuse and like this network of abuse that just grows and grows. And so why that issue?
So I'm gonna try and answer this without sounding really like pretentious and preachy. So the ants and the mom are metaphors, and they represent the duality of how God is presented in modern day Christianity. The mom is kind-hearted, loving, unequivocally accepting, and always listening, always available, and out of sight, but you trust that the support is there. The ants is how Christianity is so often perverted these days. Do exactly as I say because I love you. You can't disobey me or I'm going to hurt you. And so you need to be subjected via this fear because I love you. And, give yourself to me unconditionally, agree to my arbitrary rules because I love you. It's that sort of thing. And that's why with the graveyard scene in particular, he's talking to both of them. That is why the ant's pronouns are capitalized, is metaphor for God. And so, that's why I wrote that. I was initially worried about actually tying it into the story because it is just like a bunch of stuff going on at once. But I did try to write those parallels in there. And there's even moments where it talks about, like, for example, she jokes about security cameras that she's going to like put one on him. And so he's afraid she's like always watching. He's very fearful of disobeying, even if it's harmless disobedience. And I wanted to examine how that can affect someone both in a spiritual sense with the religious stuff, but then also just in a practical sense, how much that can suck if that's your household. And so that was the way I sort of tried to tie that together. And that's also why part 3 specifically does not have the ants in it at all, because part 3, again, I'm sorry if I sound pretentious, that is also a metaphor. It's parallel to the Garden of Eden, where it's two people completely on their own and just isolated. And to me, that was important because it shows that when they're on their own, these two work pretty well together. It's when you add those other damaging influences that it makes it difficult and can just ruin things. And I didn't mean it to be like a cautionary tale, but, if nothing else, I was thinking maybe there would be some parent out there that reads it and takes a look in the mirror as to, how they are accepting or not accepting their child. So, yeah, I hope that was
blowing my mind.
I know.
I feel like I just uncovered a new dimension that I need to go read again now.
Yeah, no, there are so many little tiny things in the book that no one but me is ever gonna notice. Let me see if I can name a few. There are 7 stars in the sky when the boys are looking at it. That's an allusion to the 7 stars that the angel carries in the book of Revelation when the world is about to end, and that happens moments before the boys are discovered in the cabin, and that world comes to an end there. Chapter 25 takes place on Christmas because I wanted to shove that in there. The book's in 3 parts because that represents the Holy Trinity. There's all this stuff, and I was so obsessed over putting it all in there when I wrote it, and then when it came out, I realized most people do not hold the magnifying glass to it that I think they do. So now it's just a bunch of fun little Easter eggs.
It's kind of like the opposite of everyone always says oh, they just made when you're in English class and you have to dissect a book and they're like, oh, they just made the curtains blue because they wanted it to be blue. And you are the proof that is not true.
Well, it's funny because I was the loudest person in English, ninth grade English, who would be making fun of that. I would mock my English teacher to her face and be like, the curtains are not blue for any reason. And now, here I am at an event being like, it's the Garden of Eden. It's I've done a complete 180 in just 10 short years. Yeah.
I think that's very Sorkin-esque.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel, yeah.
Yes. Now, yeah, it's all these extra things give me a new perspective on the story itself. So, yeah, gonna have to go and change my Goodreads review again because I learned all this other stuff about it.
So, now that you are you've written this book. It's gotten a lot of recognition. We mentioned Kirkus and so many other lists and just awesome, well-deserved accomplishments. You kind of see on your social media, there's this like YA community that you're a part of. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, or at least it seems like it from the outside. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what it's like to be in this like YA writer world.
I could start a whole podcast on that subject, Kelsey. Yeah, short version. It's a mixed bag, you know. The thing about my first book is it was written in a complete vacuum. I had not read Adam Silvera, never heard the name before. I hadn't read Becky Albertalli, never heard the name before. Really, the only YA authors I had read are like Laurie Hulse Anderson and Bill Koenigsberg at the time. I was not on Twitter at the time. I was not at all part of the community. And I think that's a little unusual because what I see a lot of is like aspiring authors who sort of become part of that community. And like a lot of my friends in the sort of social community there are either agented and on submission or like querying. And I sort of did it late where I jumped in there as I was like promoting my book. And so why that's interesting is because writing my second book after being sort of integrated in the community was so different. I felt like there were 50 people looking over my shoulder as I was writing it, and that was equal parts good and bad. I love the community dearly because, well, for one, it allows me to have more than 6 friends as a 20-something, which is a pretty big accomplishment. And then also, it's just, I mean, it's a community. You know, there are people that you hang out with at conferences, and then you go back to conferences later, and it's like a school class reunion or something, and you get to see each other, you know, lifting each other up online, and that's all great. But there is also, I'll make a neutral statement here, a huge magnifying glass with YA Twitter, where there is a lot of discussion, equal parts good and bad, about whatever is being written. And just being honest, I'm like the old man that just doesn't like that. I don't like how instantly hyper communicative social media is. Again, I sound like 75 right now, but I almost want to be an author who's like isolated and alone, just writing my book, and then you hear from me once every 2 years, and I'm like, here you go. And then I can go to conferences and see all those people. Yeah, it's, sorry, this probably wasn't the answer you were expecting, but it's just, being very honest, I struggle with it every day. Like, I'll take 2 seconds on Twitter, and half of the stuff, I'm glad I saw it and I like it, and then the other half, I want to get off of there forever. And it's interesting balancing that, particularly in this day and age where it's almost a necessary marketing tool. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I often have the same experience of social media, and I don't have a national platform, so you know, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you are working on a second book. Can you tell us anything about it?
Yes, but have I prepared to? That is the question. So how I've been describing it in a very, very broad nutshell, understanding that it is equally packed with stuff as my first one. I would broadly describe it as Laurie Hulse Anderson's Speak, but from a cis boy's perspective. So essentially it deals with the aftermath of his school administration learning that he was sexually assaulted by a classmate. And it's, sorry, I haven't practiced the pitch for it. It takes place across 4 years with 2 different timelines and is told in the form of multiple short stories. And it chronicles both leading up to that happening and primarily focusing on the aftermath of it. And on top of all of that, by page 90, it has turned into a completely different story, not at all encompassed by anything I just mentioned.
Wow.
I am so sorry if my pitch is not better.
You sold it to me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, you probably could have just said another take on Speak, and I would have been like, okay.
Yeah.
TBR.
Yeah. I don't want to be the courtroom, YA courtroom author guy. So it's not like a legal drama, but of course, I was interviewing a lot of Title IX coordinators from districts because I wanted to portray the school's response process. And so there's like a little bit of the legal stuff in there, but primarily it focuses on, again, it's similar to the vein of Speak, just like, okay, what does every day look like? What is it like being around your classmates when everyone sort of knows that that's going on? And then on top of that, there are, oh God, I don't want to spoil it. A big thing happens that, again, it's told in the form of short stories, and everything that I've just told you is really just the first of 4 short stories that deal with the same themes.
Wow. How cool that you are kind of doing this send up to an author who inspired you so much and telling the story that, again, is something that we don't really hear a lot about, is this perspective of this, thing that happens so often that often doesn't get told.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I've got to be honest. I am scared of Laurie Halse Anderson, like, finding out about it, because I keep rereading Speak and it's just so well written. Even, I mean, it was 20 years ago, YA was a fraction of the industry it is now, and it just holds up so well. I don't think I can do justice to it. And I know I'm doing a poor job of selling it right now by saying that, but being honest, I'm like, it's Laurie Halse Anderson, like, God, and so, yeah, I'm hoping that I'm hoping I can deliver on what I'm promising, and I wouldn't be moving forward with it if I didn't think I had.
I'm excited to read it.
Cool. I don't know when ARCs will be out, but I think it would likely be in the coming months. So, yeah.
Awesome. What's it called?
Oh, Tonight We Rule the World.
Awesome.
Yeah. A little less of a legal-ish sounding title this time.
Well, I do want to say, if anyone is watching and has a question for Zack, to type it in the chat. But if we don't get any questions, Kelsey and I still have a few that we can go.
I was going to say, that's fine with me. I'm just here on my laptop, so we can do whatever.
Well, we've already mentioned that you have a love for Laurie Halse Anderson.
Yeah.
Now that you're part of this bookish world, have you started reading a lot more?
That's really funny. I have done the opposite. I've started reading less, because here's what happens is I'll read a book and either I will become so enthralled with the writing style that it will make me feel bad about my own writing, or it will not be my thing, but somehow also make me feel bad about my own writing, because it'd be like, what if my writing is as, uncaptivating as this, even though it's not even the book's fault, it's just a personal taste thing. I feel like I don't know how public I'm supposed to be about my self-doubt and the paralysis that will often strike when I get down in the chair and go to write my stuff, but it's still very, very prominent with me. And the way I combat it is avoiding reading other people's things until I'm done working on my own. So for the first time in a year, I'm about to pick up a book again, now that I'm finishing off with this one. But last year, I started a few really, really good ones. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson and Dig by A.S. King. And both of those I had to put down halfway through because they were so good. I would sit down in my Word document and be like, no, and so yeah, I read less, and my TBR pile, I think, is about, no joke, I think it's about 45 books now.
We have a question in the chat here. What advice do you have for writers of any age who are trying to break into the industry? What advice do you wish you had when you were starting out?
Oh, that's a good one. For me personally, the main bit of advice I could have done with is it's okay to wait a few years to become published. Because when I was 15, I was really, really, really hell-bent on being the guy who like got a publishing deal at 17 or 18. And now I'm like, I'm very glad that didn't happen, because I'm even worried now that, I don't know if my brain's still developing. Maybe when I'm 35, I'll look back at what I wrote when I was 19 and be like, oh, that wasn't good. Except now it's, out there. So that, I hope that's not too disheartening of advice, but I guess my advice would be, in terms of myself personally, I wish I had been a little more relaxed about getting published and just enjoyed writing what I like to write. Because as I mentioned earlier, at first all I wrote were like knockoffs of authors I liked, which I guess you could chalk that up to like a stepping stone thing, but maybe also I was just trying to be popular and liked and write what I thought would sell. And, now I was finally able to sell something when I just wrote what I wanted to write and waited for that to come to me. In terms of breaking through in the industry, I would say a couple of things. One is being on Twitter. Again, I have my mixed feelings about being on Twitter, but I will say it is a tool for connecting writers like I have never seen before. When I was looking up literary agents, it was via the Guide to Literary Agents book that I went through with a highlighter. And these days, I could probably name a couple dozen agents by name, and it's just because I have seen them on Twitter and they have an active presence on there. So that would be a big one. I guess the only other very generic one, but I will say it again, is consume the type of writing that you want to give out. And I know 2 seconds ago I said the exact opposite, that I avoid all the writing that I want to give out. But the thing is, writing to me is about intuition. I'm a big believer that anybody, and I mean anybody, can do what I have done. Whatever level of success you think I have or haven't achieved, every single thing, someone can do it, like without any toolkit at all. Because for me, at least it feels like I was not at all born with the ability to write well. I clawed my way there very slowly. And it was by doing a lot of reading, and I'll to this day watch like well-written plays or movies or something and just rewrite the dialogue in like a notebook, and then be like, okay, what worked about that? There's also a lot of YouTube sites out there that can break down, the genius of like the Scarlet Letter or something. And yeah, that sounds really dry, but it also helps. The curtains are blue for a reason, as we have established. And yeah. I'm seeing comments sort of flash up, but I'm not having time to read them. So if there are actual questions.
We have another question up here. Do you outline
awesome.
your books before you start writing? And do you know the ending before you begin?
So a year ago, that would have been a resounding yes. With all of my books up to and including Deposing Nathan, I outlined to a ridiculous extent. One of the arguments between Nate and Cam in Deposing Nathan was actually written in the outline, where bullet for bullet was each line of dialogue. And then when I got to writing it, I just turned it into like descriptors and I put the quotes around it and stuff. But this second book has been very different. And if I sound like I am having unpleasant flashbacks, it's because I am. I went through 36 outlines for book 2, and none of them worked, and that was distressing. And so finally I said, screw it. We'll try not using one. And so I knew the ending of book 2 before I wrote it, but I didn't really know the middle. And I just kind of found it as I wrote. And then from there, it was another painstaking process of like re-outlining from that and then like rewriting from that. And Yeah, my first one I was very lucky where scene for scene, the final published book is identical to the first draft I wrote in my dorm room. I just somehow spit that out on the first take. But with the second one, no, I did not outline at all. At least not in the final version that got written. So I guess my unhelpful answer would be I have done both.
And then I see another question here. What book are you planning to pick up next?
Oh gosh, there's literally so many. Again, I'm not joking when I say I have a pile of books, 45 tall, and they're all stuff I am excited to read about. Like Angie Thomas's second book, On the Come Up, that got added to the pile the day it came out, and I still haven't gotten to it. And so, I mean, there's that. There is, again, A.S. King's Dig. Really anything by A.S. King, because I'm so hooked on her writing style after this one. Trying to think what else. Bill Koenigsberg's The Bridge came out. I want to say, time is weird in 2020. I think it was, oh gosh. It could be anywhere from 1 to 8 months ago. It was recently. I don't remember. But I love Bill Koenigsberg's books. And so that, again, it got added to my pile the day it came out, and it's just been sitting there. So I'm going to be reading for probably 2 months straight. Am I open to a visual representation? I'm assuming you mean like an adaptation. And not only am I open to that, I am so ridiculously open to it that it actually started in my head as a screenplay and since has been written by me as a screenplay. And I am very, very conspicuously trying to wave the screenplay around and be like, hey, does somebody want this? Because to sound conceited for like the third time in a row tonight, I think genuinely I am a better screenwriter than I am an author. I think authorship is my weakness and screenwriting is my strength, which is why so much of my book is just dialogue and very few descriptions. So I would want an adaptation, but we would need this to be a proper adaptation. We would need this to be one that has attention to dialogue and isn't afraid to have like a wide shot on that forest when they're in the cabin and isn't afraid to linger on close-ups and play with color schemes, some of which I tried to do in the book. But of course, if I'm describing that there's like a mix of blue and green light on someone's face, and I did that because it represents green for regrowth and blue for safety, no one's gonna get that. So yes, I'm open to it, but my stipulation is I have to write the screenplay. And you would be shocked at how many people immediately scamper away when I add that little tidbit to the negotiations.
Well, any movie producers out there listening tonight, you heard it here. Zack is open to that. Please contact Zack. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was really excellent.
Oh, yeah, this is great.
And I think we're going to turn it over now to Kyla from the Human Relations Commission.
Thank you. I mean, this was an amazing conversation. And I just want to, first of all, thank everybody for being with us this evening. I really want to particularly thank, again, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System for all of their efforts in bringing such incredible programming to our county and for their wonderful ongoing partnership that you have with us, the Human Relations Commission. Thank you, Zack Smedley, for being with us, for your time, and for this amazing conversation. And thank you again to all the viewers for tuning in. If you have not yet had a chance to read Deposing Nathan, you can order a copy from Loyalty Books, or you can borrow it from PGCMLS. As we swing into the holiday season, we are taking a little bit of a pause on some of our programming, but I do want you to know about some of the initiatives that we have coming up in 2021. On January 12th, we are planning a Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration with the library. On the 13th, our two agencies welcome Ellen Ann Fentress and DC crime novelist Neely Tucker in conversation about their experiences in white segregation academies set up in the 1970s. We're also starting a YA book discussion with the library again. The first event is on January 21st. We're discussing Lee Bardugo's Six of Crows. And our Elephant We Don't See Diversity dialogue between our office and the library starts up again at the end of February. So to learn about those programs and more, please visit pgcmls.info/events. And thank you everyone again, and have a great night.